Lian Zhang had a strange morning. It was the kind of morning where you feel like you're forgetting something important, but can't quite put your finger on it. She woke up late, as usual, to the sound of her alarm clock blaring some aggressive rock song she didn't even remember setting. The apartment was a mess, half-drunk coffee cups, laundry piled up like it was trying to form its own little mountain range in the corner of the room. It wasn't the worst disaster she'd ever had to deal with, but it sure wasn't the best start to a Thursday. She swung her legs out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom, narrowly avoiding stepping on the takeout containers scattered across the floor like landmines. With a half-blinded squint, she looked in the mirror and froze. For a moment, her reflection didn't quite match up. Her hair was a little too messy, her eyes a little too sharp. And there was something off about her face, like it was someone else's. Lian blinked a couple of times. "Get a grip, Zhang," she muttered, brushing the weird feeling aside as she splashed water on her face. "You're just tired. Stressed. Maybe a little dehydrated." But when she looked back in the mirror, her reflection didn't change. The same sharp eyes, the same strange pull to her expression. Lian ignored it and started brushing her teeth, trying to shake the weird sensation that had settled into her chest. It wasn't until she grabbed her phone and saw the message from her ex-roommate that things took a turn. Hey, did you remember to take your meds? I know we talked about it, but just checking." Lian froze, toothbrush still in mouth. "Meds? What meds?" She stared at the screen, trying to remember. Nothing came. The toothbrush slipped from her mouth as her fingers began to shake. Meds? She didn't take meds. At least, she didn't think she did. The buzz of her phone, a reminder from a calendar notification, brought her back. Appointment at 10 a.m. Dr. Li. Right, a follow-up appointment. But what for? The day didn't make sense anymore. It was like she was missing something crucial, something vital that was just out of reach. She had an eerie feeling she should know exactly what was going on, but for the life of her, she couldn't remember. By the time Lian made it to Dr. Li's office, her nerves were frayed. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and faintly of lavender, and for some reason, that made her feel even more uneasy. Dr. Li was already waiting for her, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, dressed in a white lab coat. She smiled as Lian sat down across from her. "Good to see you again, Lian. How have you been?" Dr. Li asked, flicking through a folder of notes. She didn't look up, but Lian could swear there was something about the way she said it, too much familiarity, like they'd known each other for years. Okay, Lian answered, unsure if she meant it. "I've been a little off lately." Dr. Li raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, let's talk about it." Lian hesitated, but then the words started pouring out of her. She talked about the strange sense of disconnection she'd been feeling, the odd moments of déjà vu, the feeling that her memories weren't her own anymore. She mentioned the flashes, those brief glimpses of something alien, bright lights, the hum of machinery, the feeling of being strapped to something, and the cold eyes of creatures she couldn't even describe. Dr. Li listened attentively, nodding. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something Lian couldn't quite interpret. "Do you remember anything about your last military assignment?" the doctor asked, her voice even. "Anything specific? Any unusual details?" Lian stiffened. The question hit a nerve, and her heart rate quickened. She couldn't remember. Her military service felt like a foggy dream, like something she'd only half lived through. She closed her eyes, trying to push past the wall in her mind, but all she found was a blank space, a dark gap where her memories should have been. I don't know. Maybe it's just stress, Lien muttered, gripping the edge of the chair. Something about it doesn't feel right. Dr. Lee nodded. Well, you've been through a lot. Maybe it's just the trauma. But we'll run some tests. Let's start with a blood sample, just to be sure. By the time Lien got home that evening, something else was happening to her. Her body didn't feel quite like her own anymore. It started small, an itchy sensation on the back of her neck, as though tiny tendrils were burrowing under her skin. Then came the odd feeling in her hands, like they were twitching with barely contained energy. She had a brief moment of panic when she glanced in the mirror again. Her pupils were dilated, her veins running darker beneath her skin. The color of her eyes had shifted, too, now a vivid, almost neon shade of green. It wasn't normal. Nothing about it was normal. Lien stumbled back, pressing her hands to her face. What was happening to her? She'd felt something before, something that didn't belong, but now it was undeniable. Something alien was coursing through her veins. The flashes started again, brief, disjointed, but much clearer now. She saw a sleek, metallic craft landing in the desert, glowing with an eerie blue light. A woman in a military uniform, someone who looked like her, standing next to strange figures with eyes that glowed in the dark. She saw herself, lying in some kind of sterile lab, tubes running from her body, her head filled with alien voices. She could hear them now, faint whispers, like a far-off hum that pulsed beneath her skin. Lien's heart raced. She needed to know the truth. The fragmented memories, the growing sensation inside her, it couldn't just be stress. It had to be something more. Lien's mind raced as she scoured her apartment for anything that might give her a clue. She grabbed her laptop and began to search through old military documents, hacking into the classified files she had clearance for. What she found shocked her. It wasn't just the military she'd worked for. There was something far darker, something that connected her to the alien technology she had briefly encountered. As she flipped through the files, her breath caught on a name, Project Helix. She didn't recognize it at first, but the more she read, the more the pieces fell into place. The military had been experimenting with hybridization, mixing alien DNA with human DNA, creating soldiers with enhanced capabilities. The files described her as an ideal candidate. She was one of the first to undergo the procedure. Her blood ran cold. She was no longer just Lien Zhang, the soldier with the sharp instincts. She was something else entirely. Something different. Lien sat frozen in front of the screen, the words Project Helix flashing in her mind. The more she scrolled through the documents, the more she realized that she was no longer just a soldier caught up in the aftermath of some failed mission. She was a part of something much larger, something that went far beyond any military operation she'd been trained for. Her fingers shook as she clicked through encrypted files, tracing the procedure she had been subjected to. Genetic manipulation. Alien DNA grafted into human cells. An experiment that began in the deserts of Nevada, where Lien and others had been exposed to extraterrestrial organisms, unknowingly becoming the first test subjects in a bid to merge the two species. The goal was to create a hybrid soldier, one capable of surviving environments that would kill humans, one who could understand and potentially communicate with alien intelligence. As Lien read, the pieces of her memories began to fall into place. The lab. The voices. The strange energy surging through her, the alien sensations that had only grown stronger since the encounter. She was becoming what they had created. She was no longer just Lian Zhang, the soldier. She was a hybrid. A weapon. A creature that wasn't entirely human anymore. She felt a sudden pressure in her temples, as if 1,000 voices were whispering in her mind, pushing against the edges of her thoughts. It was as if the alien DNA, the part of her that wasn't human, was starting to fight for control. She could feel it, the way her muscles twitched with a strange energy, like a coiled spring ready to snap. It wasn't painful. It was powerful, like she was waking up from some deep, dormant part of her brain that she never knew existed. Her vision blurred momentarily, the world around her warping into shifting shadows and vivid flashes. She closed her eyes, steadying herself, but the images refused to fade. The craft. The aliens. The laboratory. She could feel their presence now, a psychic hum echoing in her mind. The aliens weren't just a part of her past anymore, they were inside her, mingling with her thoughts, like they had always been there, just waiting to be awakened. A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She jolted, instinctively reaching for her gun, but stopped herself just as quickly. It was probably just the neighbor again. That overly curious guy, trying to make small talk. But the knock came again, 3 quick raps this time. Lian swallowed hard, her heart racing. Her instincts, the ones she'd honed over years of military service, told her it wasn't safe. She wasn't sure if it was the alien DNA or just the fear creeping in, but something in her gut told her not to answer. Still, she stood up, her body moving almost on autopilot, and walked to the door. The air in the apartment felt thick now, charged with static energy. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. Wei stood on the other side. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed with worry. "Lian, we need to talk." Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen him in weeks, ever since the strange night she'd left the military. He wasn't just her comrade, but a friend who seemed to know more about her than anyone else. But now, standing there in front of her, he looked like he'd been running on fumes. "What is it?" she asked, trying to mask the urgency in her voice. Wei glanced over his shoulder, checking to make sure they were alone. "I've been following your trail. I had to make sure you were okay. After everything that's happened. I'm afraid you're not gonna like what I have to say." Lian felt her stomach lurch. "Just say it." He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. His eyes met hers, dark with guilt. "The military, they've been covering this up. The experiments, the aliens, they've been working on it for years. And you were part of it. They used you as a test subject, Lian. And you're changing." "I know," Lian whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been feeling it. The changes. The memories that aren't mine." Wei nodded gravely. "You're not alone in this. There are others, Lian. Others who've gone through the same thing. And they've lost themselves. The alien DNA, it's consuming them. Some of them are barely human anymore." Lian stared at him, her chest tightening. "So what? You're telling me I'm going to turn into some monster?" "No," Wei said, shaking his head quickly. "It's not that simple. They wanted to turn you into something better, something stronger, but the transformation, it's unstable. Some of the subjects are losing control. They've become dangerous. But there's a way out." "Out?" Lian repeated, her pulse quickening. "How?" Wei glanced around the apartment again, making sure no one else was listening. "I found a way to reverse it. At least, I think I did." There's a place. A research facility hidden in the mountains. I can get you there, but you'll have to make a choice, Lien. A big one. The alien DNA, it doesn't just leave. It's a part of you now. You can't just walk away from this. Lien clenched her fists, the nails already growing unnaturally long, sharp at the tips. Her reflection in the window caught her eye. She was changing. More than she'd ever anticipated. The power inside her, the alien energy, was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. I don't want to be a weapon, Wei, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to be something else. Wei reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. Then you'll need to decide who you are, Lien. What you're willing to fight for. Lien stared at the darkening sky outside her window, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. The alien part of her, the part that had been dormant for so long, was waking up, and there was no turning back. She could feel it in her bones. The alien voices were louder now, like they were calling to her, urging her to embrace what she was becoming. It was powerful. But was it her? She looked back at Wei, meeting his eyes, searching for something that might reassure her. Instead, all she saw was the fear in his gaze. He knew what was coming, and so did she. I don't know who I am anymore, she said softly, the weight of the truth settling in. But I'm not going to let them control me. Not like this. Wei didn't say anything. He just nodded, his eyes filled with a sadness that made Lien's heart ache. They didn't speak again as they left the apartment and headed into the night. The city's lights blurred as she walked, the pull of the alien energy inside her becoming stronger with every step. At the hidden research facility in the mountains, Lien was faced with the truth. The facility wasn't just a place of research, it was a prison, designed to contain the failed experiments, to keep them hidden from the world. The aliens that had helped create her weren't benevolent beings, they were predators, and she was one of their creations, just another soldier in their war. She could feel the alien part of her pushing harder now, urging her to give in to its power. But Lien fought it. She fought for her humanity, for the parts of her that hadn't been touched by the alien DNA. In the end, she knew what she had to do. Lien made the ultimate choice, not to embrace the alien side of her, but to destroy it, to sever the link once and for all. The power she wielded was enough to change the world. But Lien chose to walk away from it, to hold on to her human self, whatever that might mean now. The facility exploded in a burst of energy, the remnants of the research gone in an instant. Lien stood amidst the wreckage, her body trembling, but still standing, still human. Her story was just beginning. But one thing was certain, whatever else she had become, she wasn't going to let anyone control her again. She would find her own way, even if it meant becoming something no one could define. As she turned to leave the burning wreckage behind, the alien voices were gone, leaving only silence in their place. But Lien knew that silence wouldn't last. Whatever she had become, the fight was just beginning.